Lep pozdrav, moje ime je Maja, tako kot Jasmina, ki je bila z vami na prvem predavanju, in Filip, ki je vodil predavanje prejšnji teden, prihajam iz inštituta Danes in nov dan. Na Danes in nov dan smo se odločili organizirati ta cikel predavanj o umetni inteligenci primarno zaradi dveh razlogov. Kot prvo, ima umetna inteligenca vedno večji vpliv na naša življenja in tudi na vaša področja delovanja, ne glede na to, ali ste okoljska organizacija, se ukvarjate s socialo, diskriminacijo ali pa pokrivate kako drugo področje. Kar vam želimo pokazati je, da nimate več tega privilegija, da rečete, umetna inteligenca se nas ne tiče, ker je pač to tema, ki vpliva tudi na vas in na vaše delo. In kot drugo, razumemo, da je morda včasih strašljivo se pogovarjati o umetni inteligenci, še posebej z nekimi tehnologi in razvijalci, še posebej, ker vam bojo zelo hitro dali vedeti, da vedo več o tej temi kot vi. Namen teh predavanj je, da vam pokažemo, da ne rabite vedeti, kako zgraditi model umetne inteligence, da bi se pogovarjali o vplivu umetne inteligence na človekove pravice, demokracijo in podobno. Torej, vsi se lahko in vsi se moramo pogovarjati o umetni inteligenci. Ravno zato sem še posebej vesela, da se mi bo danes kot govorka pridružila Niv, ki prihaja iz Football Supporters Europe, organizacije, ki združuje in predstavlja interese nogometnih navijačev. Preden pa slišimo od Niv, bomo začeli to predavanje, današnje srečanje z kratkim uvodom iz moje strani na temo podatkov. Nato sledi Niv, ki bo povedala, zakaj in kako se nogometni navijači ukvarjajo z umetno inteligenco, nato pa sledi prostor za vaša vprašanja in komentarje. Torej, vsa vprašanja, ki jih imate, prosim zadržite približno prvih 40 minut, lahko jih pa tudi napišete v chat ob strani, chat bodo spremljali moji sodelavci in sem prepričana, da če bo karkoli pomembnega, me bodo ustavili, prekinili, pa lahko takoj tudi odgovorimo na kako vprašanje, ki se pojavi sproti, če bo nujno. Okej, torej, danes bom govorila o podatkih v kontekstu umetne inteligence, predtem pa bi vseeno rada vzela si nekaj minut, da naredim uvod oziroma neki kratek povzetek predavanj do sedaj. Že Jasmina in Filip sta vam povedala, da umetna inteligenca načeloma deluje tako, da model dobi input, ta input je recimo vaše vprašanje ali pa neka naloga, in na podlagi bodisi eksplicitnih navodil ali pa velike količine podobnih informacij, na katerih je bil ta model naučen, ponudi napoved, torej nek output. In zdaj, morda najbolje, da si pogledamo nekaj primerov storitev oziroma nalog, ki jih poganja umetna inteligenca, in ki so široko razširjeni v našem življenju, pa se morda niti ne zavedamo, da gre za umetno inteligenco. Torej, ko v vaš mail, v vaš inbox prileti nek mail, model naredi statistično oceno, ali je mail, ki vam je ravnokar priletel, spam ali ne, in potem glede na to oceno pošlje ta ravnokar prejeti mail bodisi v vaš inbox, bodisi v mapo za nezaželeno pošto ali pa v katerokoli drugo izmed map. Ti modeli oziroma ti spam filterji zdaj že kar dobro delajo, čeprav sem prepričana, da smo vsi že kdaj bili v kaki situaciji, ko smo prejeli kak zelo pomemben mail, pa ga nismo videli po več tednov ali mesecev, in zaradi tega, ker je mail pristal v spam mapici našega maila. Modeli lahko za vas tudi pripravijo transkript nekega predavanja na podlagi videoposnetka, lahko prevedejo besedilo iz angleščine v slovenščino, zelo široko razširjene so tudi neke različne bolj komercialne rabe, recimo na podlagi podatkov o uporabniku, recimo meni ali vas, in podatkov o glasu lahko model oceni, kakšna je verjetnost, ali bo ta oseba kliknila na oglas na spletni strani in na podlagi tega predlaga, kateri oglasi so vam servirani, ko brskate po spletu. Zopet vsi imamo izkušnjo kakega zelo nadležnega oglasa, ne samo zaradi tega, ker je bil nadležen, ne samo zaradi tega, ker je bil glas, ampak zaradi tega, ker se nam je zdelo, da je ta oglas pa res popolnoma neprimeren za nas, samo zaradi tega, ker smo enkrat nekaj googlali, nas zdaj to konstantno sledi. In zadnji primer je primer, ki ga je pojasnjeval že Filip prejšnji teden, Veliki jezikovni modeli, kot je ChatGPT, lahko na podlagi nekega zaporedja besed, to je recimo vaše vprašanje oziroma po angleško se reče temu prompt, torej na podlagi nekega zaporedja besed ta model, napove, kaj je primerna naslednja beseda. Torej, kaj naj bo odgovor, in ta odgovor je včasih, tudi zelo smiseln, morda so vaše izkušnje, da je, velikokrat zelo smiseln. Skratka, na podlagi nekega zaporedja besed, na podlagi vašega vprašanja, model, predvidi, kaj je primeren odgovor. Skupek metod, ki, računalnikom omogoča, da iz nekega inputa pripravijo, predlagajo output, torej odgovorijo na naše vprašanje, prevedejo neko besedilo, napišejo mail ali pa celo projektno prijavo, no, ta skupek metod imenujemo strojno učenje. Strojno učenje je predstavil že Filip prejšnji teden. S strojnim učenjem označujemo razvoj modela na podlagi velike količine podatkov. Tak model nato uporabimo za sklepanje o nikoli prej videni situaciji ali inputu. Na primer, na podlagi milijonov fotografij mačke lahko model strojnega učenja natreniramo, da prepozna fotografijo mačke ali pa celo zgenerira fotografijo, na kateri je mačka. Zdaj samo morda tukaj opomnik, da ni dovolj, da modelu damo samo milijone fotografij, pomembno je tudi, da je na teh fotografijah označeno, katera fotografija ima mačko na sliki in kje na sliki je mačka, torej kaj je mačka in kaj, ni mačka. Torej, strojna, inteligenca je podmnožica umetne inteligence. To zdaj ni pomembno, da gremo v detajle, tukaj se mi zdi samo zanimivo za vas, da veste, poznate razmerje med umetno inteligenco pa strojnim učenjem. Strojno učenje je množica umetne inteligence, torej vsako strojno učenje je umetna inteligenca, ni pa vsaka umetna inteligenca, strojno učenje. Torej, za strojno učenje so ključni podatki. Potrebujemo velike količine podatkov, da lahko potem natreniramo model, ki ima potem potencialno neko uporabno vrednost za nas. In če so podatki tisti, na podlagi katerih, model umetne inteligence sklepa o svetu in daje nam odgovore o svetu in predloge, rešitve, je nujno, da se pogovarjamo, o podatkih. In to je ravno to, o čemer, bomo govorili danes. Zdaj, kot sem omenila, za treniranje strojnega učenja ni dovolj nekaj fotografij, nekaj besedil ali pa par posnetkov, govorimo o ogromnih količinah informacij, o milijonih vstopnih podatkov. Torej, pravo vprašanje je, kako razvijalci sploh pridejo, do teh podatkov. Obstaja več virov. Kot prvo obstajajo odprte baze podatkov, kar nekaj takih baz obstaja, za njih skrbijo države, zasebna podjetja, raziskovalne institucije in tako dalje. Recimo vremenarji imajo zelo obsežne zbirke odprtih podatkov. Niso vse baze podatkov enako dobre, nekatere so zelo obsežne, vendar so informacije v njih slabo označene, torej tam, kjer je mačka pa ni mačka, je to slabo označeno, kar vpliva tudi na končno, delovanje modela. Mnoge izmed teh, baz podatkov so produkt, dela zahodnih raziskovalcev, kar se tudi odraža v kvaliteti podatkov. Recimo veliko baz z zvočnimi posnetki ima posnetke predvsem v angleščini, v ameriški angleščini in v britanski angleščini, kar pomeni, da modeli, ki so bili natrenirani na teh bazah podatkov, veliko slabše delujejo na drugih jezikih ali pa na dialektih angleškega jezika. Podobno ima veliko baz fotografij nadpovprečno veliko fotografij belih moških, kar lahko vodi do nekaterih seksističnih ali pa rasističnih rezultatov, oziroma ti modeli veliko bolje delajo na belem moškem, dajo boljše rezultate za belega moškega kot za katerokoli drugo skupino ljudi. Potem veliko odprtih baz podatkov, je sestavljeno iz nekih javnih objav, recimo objav v časopisih. Tudi tukaj prihaja do nekih, omejitev uporabnosti teh podatkov, zaradi tega, ker se moramo zavedati, da če gledamo recimo objave v časopisih, pomeni, da treniramo model samo na stvareh, ki so bile dovolj pomembne, da so se znašle v časopisu. Torej ne treniramo modela na vseh podatkih o, življenju recimo v nekem letu, ampak o tistih podatkih, ki so se znašli v časopisu. Drugi vir podatkov je lahko prenos podatkov iz spleta. Gre za skrajpanje interneta, vseh spletnih strani, vsega, kar je bilo kadarkoli objavljeno. To je lahko zelo koristno in nam lahko pomaga razvijati modele strojnega učenja, lahko pa je tudi zelo problematično iz 3 vidikov. Kot prvo, takšno skrajpanje poteka brez privolitve avtorjev besedil, fotografij in drugih materialov, ki so objavljali te materiale na spletu. Poleg tega, kot drugo, gre tukaj velikokrat za osebne podatke. Recimo, če imate na Facebooku objavljeno svojo sliko, obstaja zelo velika verjetnost, da je vaša fotografija v eni ali več baz podatkov. In kot tretje se pojavlja tudi vprašanje kvalitete podatkov. Torej, ni vse, kar je na internetu, tudi kvalitetna informacija, ni vse, kar je na internetu, informacija, na podlagi katere bi mi želeli trenirati nek model, ki nam bo potem dajal neke informacije o svetu. Tretji vir podatkov so sintetični podatki, to so podatki, ki jih raziskovalci ustvarijo za namene treniranja umetne inteligence. Recimo Filip, ki ste ga spoznali prejšnji teden, razvija algoritem, ki bo prepoznal oglase v starih časopisih in zaradi tega bo moral biti sposoben prebrati star časopis. In zaradi tega, da bi lahko natreniral tak model, potem on računalniško umetno mečka neke članke ali pa poliva kavo po njih, zato da bo ta model bil sposoben prebrati tudi članek, ki ima odtis skodelice kave na sebi. Sintetični podatki so tudi naziv za podatke, ki jih je ustvarila umetna inteligenca. Tudi take podatke lahko razvijalci uporabljajo za treniranje modela in to ima svoje prednosti in slabosti, ki pa morda se ne bomo jih lotili danes, ker smo omejeni s časom. Četrti vir podatkov so podatki, ki jih imajo podjetja o vas. Podjetja, s katerimi interaktirate v vašem življenju, imajo ogromno podatkov o vas. Recimo podjetje, ki je razvilo avtomobil, ki ga vozite, ve ogromno o vaših navadah. Podjetje, pri katerem opravljate spletne nakupe, vas izjemno dobro pozna, ali pa na koncu koncev Facebook, od katerega sicer niste nič kupili, ampak nič ne de, saj oni ne rabijo, da jim vi daste denar, saj ste jim vi bolj vredni kot podatkovna točka, kot pa kakršenkoli denar, ki jim ga vi lahko daste za neko storitev oziroma za neko stvar, ki bi jo kupili od Facebooka. Te podatke lahko nato podjetja prodajajo drugim podjetjem ali pa jih uporabijo v lastnem poslovanju, oziroma torej lahko oboje naredijo, uporabijo v lastnem poslovanju, da optimizirajo lastno poslovanje oziroma maksimizirajo dobičke. Torej, da vas zadržijo na platformi, da vam prodajo novo majico, da vam prodajo še eno storitev, en upgrade v vašem avtu in tako dalje. In zadnji primer, ki ga bom omenila, oziroma vir podatkov, je crowdsourcing. Velikokrat podjetja in raziskovalci crowdsourcajo zbiranje podatkov, torej pokličejo, nagovorijo množico in prosijo, da vsi sodelujejo pri zbiranju podatkov. Recimo trenutno poteka zbiranje besedil za razvoj slovenskega jezikovnega modela, v katerega lahko prispevate tudi vi, to je na povej.si. Sicer, vkolikor boste vi svoja slovenska besedila oziroma besedila v slovenščini prispevali, bo to res en zelo, zelo majhen odstotek besedil, na katerih bo ta model bil treniran, ker glavni vir, predvsem s tem crowdsourcingom želijo razvijalci nagovarjati velike raziskovalne institucije, akademske institucije, knjižnice in tako dalje. Torej pač vire, ki imajo res ogromne količine podatkov pri sebi. Problem crowdsourcinga je podobno kot pri prenosu podatkov iz spleta, da lahko dobite zelo hitro zelo veliko shitty podatkov, ki odražajo neke pristranskosti družbene oziroma neke biases, ki so prisotne v družbi. Okej? In zdaj sem jaz v bistvu že v zaključnem, ampak morda najbolj pomembnejšem delu mojega predavanja, tako da če ste do zdaj pisali kaka poročila ali pa maile, zdaj super, da se lahko, to je ta cue, da se mi posvetite. Torej, ker o podatkih namreč lahko veliko in na dolgo govorimo, mi pa tega časa nimamo in sem se odločila izpostaviti 3 ključne perspektive, skozi katere lahko razmišljamo o umetni inteligenci v povezavi s podatki. Zame so to neki 3 ključni zaključki, ki se meni zdijo najpomembnejši. Zdi se mi pa tako, gre za 3, samo 3 zaključke, ki so zelo preprosti in lahko ponujajo pomembno perspektivo, ki jo lahko vi s seboj vzamete iz tega predavanja in ki vam lahko pomaga razmišljati o umetni inteligenci, ki vam lahko pomaga, ki vam lahko ponudi neko perspektivo, ki jo uporabite, ko berete članke o umetni inteligenci, ko uporabljate, aplikacije, ki temeljijo na umetni inteligenci in tako dalje. Prva taka perspektiva je, da umetna inteligenca je rezultat zelo resničnega, zelo realnega človeškega dela. In ravno zato je morda umetna inteligenca slabo ime, ker implicira, da gre za neko sintetično materijo, za neko mehansko delo, v realnosti je pa popolnoma drugače. Modeli strojnega učenja so natrenirani na resničnem, neumetnem, avtorskem delu, na knjigah, ki so bile napisane, na blog zapisih, ki ste jih objavili vi, vaši prijatelji ali pa anonimneži na spletu, na fotografijah, ki so jih posneli profesionalni ali pa amaterski fotografi in tako dalje. Večina teh avtorjev ni bila nikoli vprašana, ali sprejmejo, da bo model strojnega učenja natreniran na njihovih podatkih, niti jim ni bilo za to delo, niti niso bili za to delo s centom kompenzirani. In morda to zveni preveč drastično, ampak umetna inteligenca temelji na kraji avtorskih pravic. Temelji na kraji, ki prinaša ogromno bogastvo velikim tehnološkim podjetjem. Poleg tega pa obstaja še druga perspektiva, ki kaže, kako umetna inteligenca ni zares umetna. Človeško delo ni vključeno samo v proces proizvodnje avtorskega dela, ki je nato uporabljeno za treniranje modelov, ampak je človeško delo uporabljeno tudi za označevanje oziroma anotiranje teh podatkov. Če se spomnite, na začetku sem govorila o nekih milijonih slik mačk, no, te milijone slik je nekdo moral označiti, nekdo je moral na vsaki sliki označiti, kje gre za mačko, kje ne gre za mačko in tako dalje. Označevanje največkrat, skoraj vedno, delajo ljudje, velikokrat raziskovalci, še večkrat pa poceni delovna sila iz globalnega juga, ki je za svoje delo izjemno podplačana. In zdaj, morda označiti mačko na fotografiji ni tako težko, ampak stvari se zelo hitro zakomplicirajo, že pri neki taki absurdni, trivialni zadevi, kot je avto. Recimo, a je trikolesnik avto, a je kombi avto, stvari zelo hitro postanejo komplicirane in zdaj pač avto je morda trivialen primer, ampak lahko pridemo do vprašanja označevanja jeze ali pa označevanje, ali je oseba na sliki zaljubljena, ali oseba laže. To so stvari, ki so izjemno kulturno pogojene, in zaradi tega tudi ta proces označevanja velikokrat vodi do slabih rezultatov, slabih podatkov. In o označevanju bi lahko veliko govorili, ampak kar želim, da si zapomnite, je, da je v bistvu to izjemno kompleksno pa izjemno težko delo, ki ga velikokrat delajo podplačani ali pa celo nič plačani delavci, ker velikokrat se tako delo tudi crowdsourca neki splošni javnosti. In zato zelo hitro pridemo do slabih podatkov, ki vodijo do slabih rezultatov. Zdaj, zakaj slabi podatki vodijo do slabih rezultatov, pa kaj so nevarnosti, tega bom govorila kasneje. Za zdaj morda samo si je važno zapomniti iz tega slajda, ki sta ga imela objavljenega tako Jasmina kot Filip, to, da v bistvu res morda ni fer, da govorimo o umetni inteligenci, ker je to zavajajoče, ker spregleda, da ti sistemi temeljijo na zelo človeškem, na zelo resničnem, zelo kreativnem in kompleksnem delu. Drugi zaključek, druga perspektiva. Z umetno inteligenco postajajo podatki surovina, ki ima ogromno vrednost. Kliki, ki jih delate na spletu, niso samo vaši, lastijo si jih različne korporacije, ki z vašim delom sebi večajo dobičke. Recimo, ko med jutranjo kavo scrollate po Facebooku, delate v bistvu zastonj za Meto, ki bo podatke o vaših navadah uporabila za to, da bo optimizirala svoj algoritem, da boste vi preživeli več časa na platformi, oni pa bodo posledično pritegnili več oglaševalcev in tako povečali svoje dobičke. Pri čemer dajmo sploh ne pozabiti na primeru Facebooka, da so optimizirali svoje algoritme do te mere, da so dokazano vodili k večji ekstremizaciji uporabnikov in to ne namerno. Njihov cilj ni bil ekstremizacija uporabnikov, njihov cilj je bil vas čim dlje zadržati na platformi. Torej, podatki so biznis, vaša sled na internetu pa ne ostane samo v rokah podjetja, ki je te podatke zbiral, velikokrat se ti podatki potem prodajajo naprej, brez vašega eksplicitnega znanja ali pa privolenja. In to ne velja, by the way, samo za internet, podatki se zbirajo tudi v vašem fizičnem, realnem življenju, v različnih fizičnih aspektih vašega življenja, recimo, ko kupujete Spika kartico v Mercatorju, tudi zastonj delate za Mercator in zbirate neke podatke, ki koristijo podjetju. In kot tretje, rezultati umetne inteligence so samo tako dobri, kot so dobri podatki, na katerih je bil model natreniran. Outputi modelov strojnega učenja so lahko v primeru kakovostnih podatkov, ki so dobro strukturirani, lahko zelo uporabni. Problem pa je, da večina časa življenje in svet ne deluje tako. Nimamo kakovostnih podatkov in ti podatki niso dobro strukturirani. Podatki, na katerih se trenirajo modeli strojnega učenja, niso nevtralni, ampak so odraz naše družbe, ki je polna predsodkov. Na primer, baze podatkov imajo odlične podatke za bele moške, to sem že omenila, in imajo mnogo slabše podatke za vse druge kategorije ljudi. In da smo si na jasnem, to ni samo problem umetne inteligence, to je problem vseh baz podatkov in celotnega raziskovalnega dela, ker recimo, verjetno ste že slišali za primere medicinskih raziskav, da se je včasih primarno delalo raziskave za medicino na belem moškem, kar je seveda privedlo do tega, da nekateri izmed zaključkov teh raziskav niso bili relevantni za ženske, ker se je izkazalo, da moški in ženska pa morda nista v vseh primerih popolnoma enaka, oziroma da zaradi nekih kategorij, recimo dejstvo, da imajo ženske ponavadi drugačno kilažo, hormone, navade, na koncu koncev biologijo, se je izkazalo, da rezultati, ki držijo za moške, ne nujno držijo za ženske. Problem tega je, ko se taki podatki predstavljajo kot nevtralne in ko se modeli, ki so bili natrenirani na takih podatkih, predstavljajo kot nevtralne, kot nekaj, kar bi moralo biti splošno uporabljeno. Ker podatki velikokrat prioritizirajo bele moške, je potem preostanek sveta, velikokrat zveden na stereotipe. Tukaj lahko pogledamo primer rezultatov, ko iščemo na platformi Midjourney Indian person. Torej vidimo nekega starejšo osebo z brado v neki tradicionalni obleki, ampak v bistvu dobimo na tisoče fotografij basically istega stereotipa, ne. Torej, ta Indian person, oseba iz Indije se je zvedla na nek stereotip Indijca in tako model prikazuje osebo iz Indije. Primerov slabih podatkov, ki vodijo do slabih in rasističnih rezultatov, je res neskončno. Sistemi za prepoznavo obrazov recimo ne prepoznajo črncev, ali pa jih velikokrat zamenjajo oziroma zelo slabo delajo na črnih obrazih. Sistemi za predikcije zločinov velikokrat kriminalizirajo manjšine in tako dalje. Zdaj, hotela bi samo opozoriti pa, da ne gre vedno samo za predsodke, ko govorimo o slabih podatkih, ker ne smemo pozabiti, da model oziroma umetna inteligenca ni zares inteligentna. Tukaj imamo primer, ko so raziskovalci razvijali model za prepoznavo kožnega raka in se je izkazalo, da je model dajal zelo slabe rezultate. Največkrat je prepoznal ocenil, da je nekaj rak, ko je šlo za sliko, ki je bila posneta v visoki kvaliteti, torej slika je imela visoko rezolucijo in zraven je bilo takšno merilo kot na tej fotografiji. Zakaj se je to zgodilo? Zaradi tega, ker baze podatkov, na katerih je bil ta model treniran, so bile fotografije iz bolnišnic že potrjenih rakov, kožnih rakov, in te fotografije potrjenih kožnih rakov so bile ponavadi posnete v bolnišnici, torej je bila kvaliteta boljša, in zaradi tega, ker so spremljali rast oziroma opazovali spreminjanje raka, so imeli zraven merilo. Torej, model je asociiral merilo in kvaliteto fotografije z možnostjo kožnega raka, samo zaradi tega, ker se je to pokazalo, ker je bilo tako prikazano na prejšnjih fotografijah kožnega raka, seveda pa to nima smisla, kar samo potrjuje in kaže na to, da umetna inteligenca ni inteligentna. Ker so podatki velikokrat slabi, je izjemno pomembno, da so baze podatkov transparentne, da imamo dostop do njih, da jih lahko neodvisno verificiramo. Ampak nažalost se to seveda ne zgodi, ker, kot sem prej govorila, podatki so surovina, ki ima ogromno vrednost, ki prinašajo veliko denarja, veliko podjetjem, in zaradi tega odpiranje takih baz podatkov se velikokrat ne zgodi. Morda nazadnje samo še ena druga perspektiva o podatkih in umetni inteligenci. Namreč ves čas sem govorila o tem, kako potrebujemo ogromne količine podatkov za treniranje modelov, vendar veliko teh modelov je lahko uspešnih v navednicah, samo če dobijo ogromne količine osebnih informacij kot input, na podlagi katerega potem pripravijo output. Recimo, modeli biometričnega nadzora, ki naj bi nas ščitili pred zločinci na cestah, recimo, potrebujejo kamere po celotnem mestu, da lahko spremljajo zločine na cestah. Ali pa, če želimo kontrolirati obnašanje navijačev na nogometnem stadionu, za umetno inteligenco potrebujemo kamere na stadionu. Ali pa recimo primer iz Srbije, kjer s pomočjo algoritmov odločajo o prejemnikih socialne pomoči, da lahko model deluje, mora spremljati TRR račun upravičenca. Torej, tudi enkrat, ko je model strojnega učenja natreniran na ogromni količini podatkov, se zbiranje podatkov sploh ne konča. Podatki se zbirajo naprej še zato, da se model izboljšuje, hkrati pa se podatki tudi zbirajo kot predpogoj, da lahko algoritem sploh deluje in da nam lahko pove nekaj uporabnega, če sploh karkoli uporabnega o svetu. Okay? In s tem jaz zaključujem prvi del tega predavanja. Hvala, da ste zdržali z mano. I'm now switching to English. And I would like to welcome Niamh. Niamh is our guest speaker today. Niamh is going to talk a bit about what do football fans have to do with artificial intelligence. And I'll just pass the words to her.
Good morning from a very rainy and windy Ireland. It's nice to be here. Excuse the fact I don't speak Slovenian, but I will slow down because I know Irish people can talk quite quickly. So what I want to do is go through a little bit about Football Supporters Europe, where I work, and really how newer technologies are changing quite a lot of the work that we do. So I have a few slides which will help me, and then I'm happy to take any questions or discuss anything. So as I mentioned, I work for Football Supporters Europe. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Head of Governance, and probably I'm the one that's taken quite a bit of interest in this topic. And what I'd like to do is maybe explain a little bit about the organization to show actually we're not really technology people, and then show you why we've had to become more familiar with it, if that makes sense. So let's see if the right button works. Yeah, that was the one. So a little bit about Football Supporters Europe first. So we're the democratic, passionate voice that represents the interests of supporters in European football. And we exist to make an impact for fans by acting as a watchdog and enhancing supporter rights while providing training, resources, and information. And what does that mean in simple English? I suppose it's that piece there where we say we want to make an impact for fans. We have in the region of about 1,400 members, and that's a mix between individual fans, local groups that would support one team, so they might be Man United fans or PSG fans, and then we have about 70 national supporters organizations, which would be organizations that have multiple organizations. So in total, we actually represent millions of football fans through the structures that we have, which are quite complex. And our vision, I think, is something when you hear, and I was following along some of the slides because some of it was understandable. Like our vision is to ensure that football is safe, affordable, and accessible to everybody, and that supporters are actually considered not a problem and not something to be corralled, but the heart of the game and the passion and the enjoyment. So there's a few of these slides I'm gonna. Oh, I think I skipped one. Nope. I'm not going to go too much into this, but really what I want to stress is that Football Supporters Europe was founded to actually organize a congress. So our job has always been to bring football fans together, to really examine fan culture, to talk about the positives of fan culture, and to make it a pleasant and an inclusive experience for everybody. So it was very lovely foundations and tenants. So we are a non-profit member association based in Germany. We have a democratically elected board, and we currently have 11 staff working across 7 EU countries. So we all remote work. As I mentioned, I'm based in Ireland. My club is Cork City. We're going to get promoted and get our trophy this evening, which is very exciting because we play through the summer. But some of our some of our staff support much bigger football clubs. So we're a big mix. And we're active in 48 UEFA nations. So not just the EU, we work right across from Iceland to Turkey and from Norway down to Cyprus. It's quite a large area. And, football fans are very diverse, but what we really work with are those fans that want to get organized around something and to have a voice. That's the key thing. So we act as a voice on behalf of supporters, but we also help supporters to find their voice and to organize. And here's the bit of propaganda, which I think is very important. So what do? We do things like we observe the UCC finals. We were at the Euro, just making sure supporters were okay. We assisted fans of 46 teams that were involved in UEFA club competitions last season. We have a survey where we actually ask people how they got on. There's a role called the supporter liaison officer role in football. So it's something that your club would appoint a person who would advocate, support, and train around that. We helped deliver a workshop at UEFA. We actually deliver training through the UEFA Academy to SLOs. We were involved in several EU projects. So Safer, that you see listed there, is about making football safer for female football fans. TPDS is around building the sort of foundations of the role for the supporter liaison officer. And one of my favorites is the future of football, where we're actually looking at how to keep young people and get young people involved in football, which is a huge topic close to our hearts, really. It's to keep that democratic element. So I suppose what I wanted to do was give you a flavor of the sort of stuff that we do, which is very much training, active citizenship, helping fans to organize and become active and get organized. So very nice things. So why am I here to talk about technology? And very often we get, what's the problem? There's a perception out there that perhaps, and there is violence in football. We're not trying to say there isn't. But what we do talk about and what we very quickly recognized was an issue, which is why we're part of EDRI, which is the European organization around digital rights, was that fans, just like everybody else, have a right to privacy. We have a right to association, and we have a right to expression. And just because there's the potential for trouble doesn't mean you can react and impinge and enforce draconian measures on everybody. So we've become test subjects. All of the latest, I heard a mention of facial recognition technology, surveillance, all of these new technologies that companies are coming up with. Football seems to be the first place that they bring some of these technologies, but not finished technologies that have been examined and challenged and made to see are they okay. They're bringing early versions and betas and products that are not quite finished. So football fans, because of the security element, very often are the ones that they're tested on. And that's something we're very much against. And this is not a recent thing, unfortunately. So if we think about 2018, just to touch on some of it, the FIFA World Cup was in Russia. I won't go into too much detail, but a colleague of mine in our organization, as a joke, was told by somebody involved in the host organization, as soon as you put a foot into any football stadium in Russia, I'm going to get a ping. And it's exactly that. So a couple of months later, my colleague was just on a personal visit into a football stadium in Russia. And next thing, he got a text from this person involved in the organization going, I see you're in X ground. So that's one indication of just how creepy and in the name of security that these things can become. So facial recognition technology was also used at the Europa League final in Baku. And that was something, it wasn't at the football stadium, it was in and around the city as people were coming into the city. And that's not something people in the EU at the time would have been very familiar with. And in 2020, if people follow English football, or in this case Welsh football specifically, so the South Wales derby between Cardiff and Swansea, it's a big rivalry, and they introduced facial recognition technology. And just to be very clear on the numbers here, over 20,000 people were monitored, and there were 50 orders or people who were considered to be risk. So for keeping an eye on risk 50 people, they monitored the activities and the data and the I suppose the pictures and all of your data for 20,000 people, which to us is the core of the problem. It doesn't seem a proportional response. And of course, we did know and we're very aware of issues at the FIFA World Cup rules typo in Qatar, which I don't think anyone was surprised about. But I suppose what it comes down to is that some of these technologies are being seen as kind of shortcuts or cost cutting. We'll save money if we bring in technology, when actually what we're saying is that the core of the work around football has to be dialogue. So you need to have a strong dialogue between your fans and the security team and police. You need to talk to each other. You need to understand each other's motives. You need to absolutely, if someone individually, breaks rules or does something illegal, you identify them and you bring them away and you punish them. But what we're saying is the collective has actually been targeted to try and weed out smaller numbers. And the way we say it is technology is not a shortcut for proper policing, proper dialogue, and proper relations. And that's one of the things that we would be quite strong on. So facial recognition technology is probably the one that we have seen some challenges and movements around. So we have a quote from police from the Champions League final in 2017, which was held in the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff. And the quote from the police afterwards, from one senior police involved in the game, was that there was hundreds, if not thousands, of false positives in the FRT technology that was used that day. And that's our big challenge here collectively as groups. So I saw some of the slides talking about the quality of data and the importance of what you put in. All of these softwares and AI and all of them, the data is key. If you don't have good data going into it, what are you doing and what sort of effects you're going to get? And what we see, and we saw it at the Euros, so English police would have surveyed every single England fan that was at the Euro, and they found one person that shouldn't have been there. So does that justify the means? And then on what basis are they keeping the data? How are they securing it? Which moves us nicely on to the next point. This is GDPR. When you talk about someone's data, their facial features and their physical being and pictures of them, it's one of the highest forms of protected data. And it's very important that people realize football fans have rights, same as everybody else. The way I like to explain this actually to people, I said, if you go into the city centre and you're going shopping for shoes, runners, are you comfortable with the fact that cameras are going to see you get off the bus, see which stores you go into, record everything, record all your interactivities when you're in those stores on the chance that you might steal those shoes? And that's the way that when you put it to people like that and you take away the football surroundings, that brings it back to reality for people. And it goes on to that point of what feeds the software. So a lot with effort for facial recognition technology, we do know that it struggles with diversity. We do know that false positives are higher amongst people who are not white, and they need a database to begin with to feed into these things. So where is that data coming from the beginning? It's one of the biggest questions that we would challenge as well, because does it mean you have to record your fan base for years to actually have an effective tool? And what are the challenges and the negatives related to that? And we've touched on this point already. Is the response proportionate? So if we take those figures from the South Wales Derby, we had 50 people who they felt might cause trouble. It wasn't guaranteed. So they surveilled 20,000 people. And then you had at least 10,000 England fans went to the Euros. I'd say a lot more kind of going in and out. And in response, they had one person that they identified that shouldn't have been there. Was that a proportionate response? And everything we do when we talk about fairness and due process and justice, it does talk about proportion as well. Because this is the next step. We've already had clubs talk about this. Let's get away with tickets completely and just scan your faces going into football grounds. And again, I'd encourage people to think about, would you be comfortable not getting a ticket for your cinema, but turning up to the cinema and getting your face scanned just to attend the cinema? Or if you want to go to the theatre, you don't get a ticket, they just scan your face. And I know we see some of these things and say, some countries like Japan are far ahead of this, but there's so many different considerations that come out of this, that what we're saying is we need to slow it down and actually make sure that we understand the negatives and to definitely try and balance those out. So we'll move on. What are the challenges for FSE? So you've heard me, I'm a football fan, my colleagues are football fans. We're facing all of these new and emerging technologies. We're wondering what they are, because and it's a point further down. We're fan activists. We're not IT experts. So how do we know, and how do we understand what's coming? And the answer is, that's why we connect in with the likes of EDRI and the likes of Maya and our colleagues, because we are talking to other non-profits and understanding the challenges they have too. The absolute reality to the second point is that there is useful elements to AI. We use some of it, and I don't know if it's the same in Slovenia, but there's a lot of discussion in Ireland and even the UK at the moment about how some tools are, some design tools, for example, graphic design tools, you can essentially eliminate a graphic designer and create you can eliminate the use of photography and just create images from scratch. So that discussion about, do you use the raw materials or do you skip forward? So there are elements to AI and some of these newer technologies that definitely have benefits, but where is the line and where are we making a conscious decision about it? So to the bottom bullet point, I think it's the biggest point that we make, is that we want to be able to make conscious decisions about what we are doing. So if I'm a football fan and I want to go and see my local football club, I shouldn't have to be subjected to filming. I shouldn't have to give in physical details of myself to watch football. I should know that any data that is taken, so my name and address when I buy the ticket, is stored securely. And I should be able to make those conscious decisions. We know and see in Italy, for instance, you have to have your passport name and your name and address on your ticket. So there's already moves to try and limit what football fans can do in the name of security. And I suppose our big challenge as FSE is, how do we understand and get to know these technologies, and then on behalf of our members able to push back on the bits that are not positive and really do need pushback. And then kind of, I suppose, share and utilize those tools that are actually quite useful, because there is some of it that is useful. Generally, what we see as well is that we see an incident, and we had one in Dublin that was not related to football late last year, about a year ago, where there was literally a right-wing riot in the middle of the city. And of course, the next day were all the headlines about how the police need more powers, they need to be able to surveil, they need to have all this FRT. And you're going, you have one instance that we don't know the root cause of it, and your immediate jump is to introduce technology where we don't see and understand the full consequences yet. So I was part of a panel discussion actually earlier this year with a gentleman from the US, and he had been falsely identified using facial recognition technology in Chicago. And he was kept in prison for 3 days, locked up, no access to, his usual standard rights, suffered massive health problems as a result of the stress, and is now suing Chicago Police Department because of it. So there's very real risk around it, and that's something that we really want people to be aware of. But we also want to try and be constructive partners and sort of saying, what are the alternatives? One thing, and I kind of wanted to leave on a note of how things are changing, finish on a note of how things are changing. But it's this, and it's happened literally, as you can see, last month in September. The NFL has been using facial recognition technology for a little while, but now it's actually the police are refusing to comply because they know that there are challenges with it, and they know that it's not all okay. So they don't want to be part of it. And that was something, when we saw that headline, we sort of went, okay, it's starting to get into the mainstream about some of the challenges around this technology and some of the things that we really need to think of. Because if we think of Football Supporters Europe, we have a membership database, for example, as mentioned, and it's our responsibility to make sure that's secured safely, that it's accurate, that we keep it up to date, and that we continue to use best practice. And there's one other example I would give related to data and privacy and the overreaching powers. German fans, and it was this month actually, took the police in Germany to the Constitutional Court. I can share the details later. And essentially, the Constitutional Court in Germany found that the methods that the police were using to gather data for their so-called violent offenders database were unconstitutional. There was one example of a woman. She had been on a bus, and the bus had passed through a car stop or a rest stop on the motorway, and on the bus was found some spray paint, a can of spray paint, and there had been some graffiti done at this rest stop. She was not involved, but her name was actually included on a violent football offenders database for years on end, without any end date to the data, on the basis that she travelled on a bus on which a can of spray paint was taken. And as extreme as the example is, the bigger point here is that football fans had to take a state authority to court to actually ensure that their data was treated appropriately and in line with existing legislation, which is GDPR. So it was a really massive and significant moment. So I'm going to put this here. You can visit us at fanseurope.org at any stage. But I might end this slow shot so I can see your faces. But I suppose what the case showed more than anything is that if we don't fight for our own privacy, and if we don't fight and make sure we understand these tools in particular, that no one else is going to do it. So we've moved from being an organization where we organized panel discussions and networking activities to now having to be at the forefront of understanding data and AI and FRT. And, I'm not an IT expert, but I'm quickly becoming one, because it is very, very frightening. And it is something that we've had to work very hard within the team to get people to understand the significance of it as well. And when you start digging into it, I think you quickly realize it's pretty scary, and that we do have to be active in this space and be aware not just of our responsibilities for our organizations to make sure our data is safe and our members' data is safe, but to help educate and make sure that other peoples are aware of some of the challenges that fans face, which is quite significant. But also make sure our fan groups are organized and aware and educated as well. So just something very short for me. I don't know if there's any questions or if I can clarify anything, but it is a good way of making, I suppose, some of these issues a reality. It does affect us on the ground and when we're out there, and that's why the network of organizations that have come together at a European level to work on this, it's just so important.